right, so what I want you to do right now is think back on some of your fondest memories, some of the greatest times, the happiest times of your life. For one of those, for me, it was last week watching Jeremy and Sheila, and myself for that matter, sweat eating hot wings during our hot stuff challenge. If you missed that, it's on YouTube. You can find it on our YouTube channel. It will be well worth 8 minutes of your time. But as I was thinking through this week of kind of what were some of the happiest moments of my life, I thought back to, this is pre-kids, pre-marriage, so don't judge me for not saying my marriage, my wedding day, first day my child was born. They were only born on one day. But anyway, what I'm saying is back pre all of that stuff. I grew up in the 90s. I'm a 90s kid, was a huge Dallas Cowboys fan. And Emmitt Smith was my favorite player. The first team I ever played on, flag football, I was number 22. Our team was the Cowboys, and so I was just instantly drawn to Emmitt Smith. And come to find out years later, we had a family member. You know, everybody has those aunts and uncles that aren't really an aunt or an uncle. They're just really close family members. Well, I had an aunt that lived down in Pensacola, Florida that knew Emmitt Smith. And so we got all of these details and everything worked out, and I had the opportunity to meet Emmitt Smith at one of my cousin's weddings. And it was awesome because he was at the rehearsal dinner. I got to hang out. I met his mom. I danced with his mom at the wedding, and I beat him out for the garter at the reception, which was super awesome because I can say that I beat Emmitt Smith in something, and that is an accomplishment. That was like the happiest time of my life. In sixth grade, it was just this incredible time, and I was surrounded by people, surrounded by somebody that I looked up to, surrounded by my family members, and I took my sixth grade girlfriend with me as well because her and her family were huge Cowboys fans. So that was like this high moment of my life in sixth grade. But a couple days later, after we got home, my girlfriend broke up with me, and that was kind of a low point in my life. Truth of the matter is, the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in life, we're surrounded by people. And unless you are just a crazy introvert who has just been thriving in this pandemic of being kind of just off by yourself, and that's just your goal, is to just be secluded and not be around people, chances are your highest high and your lowest low, you've been surrounded by people and relationships, and they're vital. And that's what we're talking about in this series, Tighten the Knot. And we're on week 2, and we're gonna join Chris here in just a minute as he dives in a little bit more to relationships and what we can do to tighten the knot, to tighten those bonds in our relationships.
So if you were to get on an airplane from kind of wherever you are, you probably need to go to an airport, get on an airplane, fly wherever you want to fly. You can fly to a different state, you can fly to a different country, you can go to a different continent if you want to. When you get off the plane, you can go rent a car, buy a car, drive it like you stole it car. I don't care how you get it, but get in the car and take the main road and drive as far as you want to. When you get toward the end of that, if you want to turn off that road to a lesser road, go down that road. You can go down a dirt road. Here's what I'm going to tell you. The further you go, no matter how far it is, what you're going to find is people. Wherever you go, they're there. I've traveled over 3 or 4 continents, maybe a dozen countries, and here's what I found out. You can just keep driving down roads, and there's more people, 7 billion plus on planet Earth. One of the things, whether you like it or not, is people are everywhere. Relationships are going to be part of your life because there are people everywhere, and we all have to deal with them. Here's the truth. For most of us, probably the happiest moments in your life in some way revolve around a relationship. It may be when you're a child, it may be when you first met somebody, it may be when you got married, it may be when you got divorced, I don't know. But it has something to do with a relationship. Probably your highest high points have to do with that. Another thing I'm pretty sure of, probably the lowest points in your life, the greatest hurt, the greatest struggle, the greatest frustrations you've had in your life probably center around a relationship. The best and worst of life lands in relationships. So it's just this crazy reality. So we're in the middle of a series called Tighten the Knot, and the whole purpose around the knot is just what binds us together. It's what makes relationships come together. If your relationships are good, maybe you call it tighten the knot. If your relationships are bad, maybe it's like tighten the noose. Whichever one fits for you, you can run with that. But we've all got relationships. Some of us love them. We love the thought of them. Some of us run away from it. But we all have to deal with people. As we start trying to work our way through them, there's some things we better learn. There's this really unfortunate piece of life. I like to call it the relationship conundrum. And it looks sort of like this. When we're young, a lot of us, maybe we're just trustful, maybe we're naive, I don't know. Maybe we just haven't experienced enough life yet, but we jump into relationships. Some people, that's the home where you grew up. For some people, when you get out, you find the person, a friendship, whatever it might be. And as you dig deep into it, you trust fully. You experience the highest of highs. It's like, yes, this is what I was. This is awesome. I have a great friend. I found a spouse. I found a life that I can share with others. It's all I've ever dreamed of. And then often somewhere in there, we get let down. We get disappointed. We get abandoned. We get hurt. And what happens is the hurt is so deep, we know we can't ever feel this way again. Some of you right now are going through that part of the cycle. You're going, I trusted, I loved, I was open, I was vulnerable, and now I feel like I've gotten the air knocked out of me. And one of the things that happens when you hit that low point is you say, I'm never going to feel this way again. And for a lot of us, what we do, and by the way, everybody has some of that happen to them. There's nobody that gets through this life without any of that. Unfortunately, some of you experienced that when you were a child in your home. I mean, that's some deep scars that land from there. But what all of us do when we feel that is we say, I'm never going to love. We may not say it out loud, but we say, I'm never going to love quite that way again. I'm never going to trust that much again. And what we do is we raise the baseline of how we feel. Matter of fact, if you look at this, you can begin to see it. It's like we say, here's the floor of how deeply I can hurt. Well, I'm going to raise it up here because I'm never going to hurt that bad again. That's the end of that for me. The unintended consequence of that is anytime you raise the how much I'm going to trust again to here, we also lower our ability to experience joy or to experience everything we were meant to experience in relationships. And for a lot of us, this is what our relational life looks like. We trusted fully, we got hurt. We trusted a little less, but again, and we got hurt. And we say, well, I'll never hurt that bad again. And we become protective. And every time we protect and we raise the floor, we lower the ceiling. And as we raise the floor and lower the ceiling, we lose our ability to experience the best parts of life. But it's understandable because I don't ever want to hurt that way again. And for a lot of people, they go through this in their home, with their extended family, with their friendships, some of the people you work with. For some of us, that has been our marriage story. And what happens is little by little, we go through life. Sometimes you meet somebody who's old and just bitter, and you just go, lighten up, old dude, you know? What the heck? What's going on with you? And the story would be this. I've lived a lot of life, and I've been hurt deeply. And eventually, you know what you end up with? Not a huge amount of pain potential, because I'm never going to trust anybody. But it's okay because there's not much joy potential either, because that's where it comes from. And what we end up with at the end of life is we end up flatlined. Emotionally, relationally, flatlined. I won't ever get hurt, but I don't experience much good, but you know what I am? And it is that sound that you never want to hear if you're in a loved one's room in the hospital. It's just that beep that goes across, and it's when we've ceased to be. For a lot of us relationally, we are walking through this relationship conundrum. What we learned last week from our start to our series is that relationships are incredibly complicated. They bring with them so many layers. Today, I'm a guy who loves talking about relationships. I like studying about it, learning about it, experimenting with it. I haven't perfected it, not even close, but it really interests me. What I want to talk to you about today almost seems just the reverse, because I think sometimes we find all of these little silver bullet answers, 3 easy ways to fix everything. What I want to go to today is just the opposite of that. It's a kind of a 1-point way to have better relationships. And it feels like kind of a church answer. And I hate church answers, even though I work in a church. So we'll dig in together. Maybe it'll help you. If it doesn't, at least it's helped me. And in the end, that seems like what's most important to me. When it comes to relationships, we all need help. We can all gather around that and understand it. The problem is sometimes asking for help makes me feel small. It kind of offends my pride. I'm like, I don't need help. I'll figure it out. Everybody else seems to be figuring it out, which is untrue because nobody else is figuring it out. But we all need help. When we don't ask, the problem is that small things become big things. Little conflicts become big disasters in our relationships, little things grow over time. They don't just go away. We all need help. We all have to do something. And it leads us to three things we can know for sure. And let's just start with these and let them be our baseline for everything we're going to talk about. Three things you can know for sure. One is that I need help. That's me, Chris. I'm the I. You can just go on and say it out loud. I'm talking to you through a screen. You can just talk to me through a screen. Chris, you need help. I know. Well, get off my back. Quit judging me. But I know I do. I've tried it on my own. I've failed. I've tried to self-help. I haven't. I need help, but it's okay. It's not just me, because the people around you in your life, they need help. And you know that's true. You may not want to say it out loud depending on who's in the room with you. But we all know that some of the people around you in your life, you just go, you need help. And if there's somebody with you right now and you kind of man enough or woman enough to do it, you just look at them and say, oh, well, you need help. But that's not the end. The third part is that you, whoever you are, wherever you're sitting or standing or driving or wherever you're watching this from right now, you need help. When it comes to relationships on your own, here's a big bold statement, you're going to fail. You need help. You will not experience the relationships you were intended without help. I say all of that because until you can say that you need help, I know you're free to say I do or they do, but until you can say you do, you don't have potential to get very much better. You need help. We all do. We come into the world with like this built-in need for others and a desire to make it work. The problem is over the course of time, we bump into so many unhealthy relationships and a lot of times we give up. That's where advice like this, one of the most quoted portions of Scripture is this one. Check this out. It says, God helps those who help themselves. We've all heard that before. I mean, that is floating around our world. It comes from Hezekiah 34, a passage we're all familiar with. God helps those who help themselves. And it kind of says, so suck it up. Get on the stick. You can do it. Buckle up your belt a little tighter and try a little harder. The problem is, who wins in that is self-help book writers. Who gets benefit from self-help books? The guys who write them, because they have your money and you now have no money and a book that doesn't help you very much. All of us have kind of tried this philosophy. God helps those who help themselves. The problem is God never said that. This isn't in the Bible. God never said God helps those who help themselves. There's not a book of Hezekiah. And even if there was a book of Hezekiah, you know as well as I do, it would only have 30 chapters. So this is all ridiculous. This is not at all God's perspective, but it is a lot of people's perspective and even what they believe about God. Here's what we know. You need help. I need help. We all need help. And this is not the answer, that God just helps those who helps themselves. So where do we land on the other side of that? If it's not us helping ourselves, all the way back in Exodus, it's kind of one of the first times we get a glimpse of kind of how God works, what makes him tick. Check out these verses. I think they're interesting. It says in Exodus chapter 2, it says, years passed and the king of Egypt died, but the Israelites continued to groan under the burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. I think it's this fascinating little passage because we get to see how God thinks. His people that he loves are going through hell. They have taken a beating. They're taking a beating. It is old and wearisome. They've gone generation now with this that way. They cry out to God, and I think this fascinating thing is that God heard them. It said he looked down on the people of Israel, and he knew it was time to act. He heard their cry. For some of you who believe when you cry out to God, it just bounces off of the ceiling. I'm just telling you, here's proof in time that God heard what they had to say and recognized that it was now time to act. You know what? These people recognized we need help, and when they did, they cried out for help and God heard. That is a reality that we all need to face, that when we need help, God does not help those who help themselves. As a matter of fact, just the opposite is true. Who does God help if it's not those who help themselves? He helps those who are needy. He helps those who are hurting. He helps those who cry out. He helps those who are weak. Now see, to be weak and admit you're weak are two different things, but until you can admit your need for help, then God typically won't help. What these guys did that was brilliant is they knew they couldn't fix it on their own. He helps those who are scared, who are in way over their head. He helps actually those who can't help themselves. That is the bottom line. God helps those who can't help themselves. But before God can help you, you've got to accept this one thing. When it comes to relationships, certainly you can try harder. Certainly we can do better. But in the end, we are in over our head. And without God's help, we are typically going to fail. Have you looked around lately? If you're not sure if you believe what I'm saying is true, have you looked around our world? Relationships are upside down in almost every direction. And the reason is God made us, and He made us with a need for relationships, but He also made us with a need to cry out to Him for help. I think one of the first times that the Bible ever tells us what it's like to cry out to God and God respond is in Exodus 17. And it gives us this really weird thing. I don't know how you feel about crying out to God. Sometimes we call that prayer in our little church world. I don't know how you feel about prayer. Here's one that I find really remarkable. It's just a few chapters from what we read earlier. Exodus chapter 17, this is what it says. A guy named Moses, it says he commanded Joshua, that was his military leader. He said, choose some men to go out and fight the army of Amalek for us. What had happened is God had heard the groans of the people. He had kind of brought the plagues in. And as a result, Pharaoh set the people free. They've gone, they've wandered. God has promised them a new life, and now they're entering into it. And all of a sudden, they're attacked by some people. It's going to be ugly. They've got warriors attacking a bunch of people who aren't warriors. And so what they do is they come together with Joshua, and he comes to their leader Moses, brings some men with him, and he says, hey, let's have a strategy meeting. After they do that, here was their strategy. It's not a great strategy. Listen, Moses was a guy who should have known what to do. He grew up in Pharaoh's house. He's probably been educated around strategic thinking and military things. Here was their strategy. He said, choose some men and go out and fight the army of Amalek for us. That's the first half of the strategy. Second half, tomorrow I will stand on top of a hill holding a staff of God in my hand. Joshua goes to him, says, how about fearless leader, some strategy? Here was the fearless leader strategy. You guys go down there and fight, and I'll stand on the hill with a stick. Everybody hands in the middle, 1, 2, 3, break, and off they went. Now, I don't know what you would have felt, but if I'm Joshua, I would have hoped for a little more strategy out of a strategy session than you fight and I'll stand with a stick. Beyond that, I would have hoped that our fearless leader might have been going down the hill with us. I love hey, I will lead well, you go fight, I'll watch from the hill. That was a little bit when I was growing up, when my dad and I worked on things. That's the way we did it. You get me a screwdriver and I'll do the work and I'll let you know if I need something. Well, Moses is standing on top of the hill. Joshua leads his men. So they did what Moses commanded and they fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur, the three guys that go up on top of the hill, climb to the top of a nearby hill. And here's the way the story progresses. Now, I'm amazed. Aaron was Moses' brother, so he took somebody he cared about. Hur was a guy that was a friend of them. He was the son of a guy named Caleb. You might have read about him in the Bible. That's what his name. Now, if I read anything and there's a guy named Hur, that kind of freaks me out. It feels like an Abbott and Costello who's on first thing. It's like, hey, Aaron, bring somebody with you. Aaron's, I did bring. Who did you bring? I brought Hur. Oh, I thought you were going to bring him. Oh, I did bring him. Well, who is him? Hur. It feels like that, but that's just my stupid little mind. He brings these two guys with him, and they begin to fight down the hill, and now Moses holds up his staff to God toward the heavens, and the Israelites had the advantage, but whenever he dropped his hands, the Amalekites gained the advantage, and so we have this bizarre thing that Moses goes and recognizes from the beginning that we need help. And the way he cries out to God is he goes up on the hill and he raises his staff, his stick to God, his arms to God. I don't know what he prayed. One of the fascinating things about the passage, it doesn't tell us any words. I don't know if he said words and they just didn't tell us, because sometimes that happens. I don't know if he didn't say anything. I don't know if he just groaned. Sometimes people are hurting so bad or so desperate that it's hard to even put words to it. But here's what I do know, that Moses recognized that the first part of his strategy was God. The second part of his strategy was to fight. That he didn't say, you guys go fight, we'll see how it plays out. If it's not playing out, let me know. I'll talk to God. I'll send him a text. I'll do whatever. It didn't start that way. He said, listen, our strategy is going to be, we need God's help. And with God's help, we will be enough. And without God's help, we're in trouble. So his whole side of strategy was just to say, I'm going to do this, and it proved true. As he held his arms up, they were winning. As he began to tire over the course of the day, let his arms down, the people started losing heart, and they started losing. And so there's this fascinating, I don't understand it all, but I do know this. He knew he needed help, and that God was willing to help, and God did help. And it all was based, matter of fact, as the day went on, it said he couldn't hold his arms up anymore. He even brought Aaron and her, not him, but her. He brought them both around him to hold his arms up, because sometimes when we're desperate, we need other people even to help us in our desperation to cry out to God. So that's this beautiful start. It's kind of the first thing in Scripture we see somebody reach out to God and God come through. Here's the reality for us when it comes to relationships. We are created with a dependence on God. We have it, whether you think you do or not, is irrelevant. We are all dependent on God. He made us to be dependent on Him. And for all of us to try to live within our own power is our natural thing. So He wants us to depend. We want to depend on ourselves. Some of us catch on to that far quicker than others. Some of us have to try kind of prayer, our reach out to God piece is this way. We do everything we can first, and when all else fails, pray. When all else fails, bail out to God. What He says is, I want your principal strategy to be for you to come and humbly submit yourself to me. I want you to accept your dependence on me. And when you do that, I now have the ability and the willingness to do just what you need. And when it comes to our relationships, I know it sounds so corny, and I want a so much cooler an answer than this, but I'm just telling you, in relationships, you were created to have them, but you were not created to be good at them all by yourself, and we have to depend on God, and we have to accept. Even the ones that are going well, we need to cry out to God, because our tendency is, until things get used up completely, and then we go, oh my God, literally. And that is the opposite of how we're supposed to get there. Pride and self-sufficiency are things that keep us from praying. Our ability to say, I'll figure it out, our ability to not want to admit to anybody around us or to God or even to ourselves that we have a problem. Sure, we're not getting along. Hey, I don't know if that's somebody at work or your sister or your brother or your extended family or your in-laws, because they're all crazy, right? I don't know if that's the person with whom you're married, the person who raised you, or the person you're raising or have tried to raise. I don't know where that hits, but I bet money there's somebody in your life where relationally you're going through struggle. And if that is happening, there's everything within us to go, I'll be fine. I never saw my mom and dad reach out and get help, so why would I? My friends seem to be okay and they're not getting help, and here's the ugly truth. That pride and self-sufficiency keep us from prayer. Second little piece to that is that our desperation, just the opposite, leads us to God. Desperation sounds like a horrible thing. In God's eyes, desperation is the first thing. The brilliant thing about Moses as a leader is he acted desperate before they started losing. I mean, that's brilliant leadership. Most of us have to get our butts kicked before we get desperate. We have to go broke before we say, man, we're not making enough money. You can build debt, but nobody gets too freaked out till they can't pay the last bill. You can't make the minimum payment. For a lot of us, we're in relationships and we are in debt in our relationships and we're losing ground, but a lot of us will wait till the last, till it is so broken it's hard to find the pieces, and that's when we'll realize that we're desperate. The truth is, desperation leads us to God, and here's just a little secret in case you don't want to know, and I hope this doesn't seem too rude when I tell you this, is that you're desperate. You, not just me. You said it about me earlier. You are desperate. You know, I don't feel desperate. That's a different subject. Whether or not you feel desperate is not the question, but all of us, every day, we were brought into this world and we are desperate for help. Most of us who live a healthy life recognize our desperation and call out to God. But for many of us, we wait and wait and wait till we feel desperate. And that's where the scars and that's where the hurt comes from. So here's the truth. Pride and self-sufficiency keep us from prayer, but desperation leads us to God. You are desperate. Here's the big question now. Do you know that you're desperate? In your relationships, do you feel desperate? And if you wait till the feeling is there, you may have so much scar tissue. You may have so much hurt. You may have raised the floor and lowered the ceiling till you start feeling so flatlined. And so I guess the encouragement of the day is be desperate. Don't look down on others when they are, and don't look down on yourself because you were brought into this world with a need for relationships. You were brought into this world with a desire for relationships, even if you've kind of buffed over that. And here's the tough part, and that we are desperate for God to actually fulfill those relationships. It really is quite the unique situation. Well, there's two things I want to finish off our morning with, or whenever you're watching this. I want us to look on it's kind of my image of Moses raising his two arms up. On one side, there's something we need to understand when you're desperate and you cry out to God. If you don't understand these things, you won't cry out to God. The first one is that God is able. To say, oh, God, help, and if God can't help, what difference does it make? It's like calling out to a broken person to help you as a broken person. There's only so much you can do. It's calling out to a guy who has no money and telling him you're broke. It's like, dude, I feel bad for you, but good luck. That when you call out to God, that He is able. How able is God, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. He is a God who is able. He spoke the world into existence. He separated, made light and dark and separated everything else. He just said it and it happened. He is able. That's very able. How able? He is the one that brought the plagues that made Pharaoh release the people. He was able. He was able to even change Pharaoh's heart. Now, God who can do that can do anything. Did you know God has the ability to change hearts? Does that give you a little bit of hope in your relationships? Tell you what, when the Red Sea needed parted, He was able to part it. When people needed manna, guess what? He was able to provide manna. When the disciples were out on the boat and a storm came up, He was able to calm the storm. You know why? Because our God is able. He's not just out there, but He is out there and He is able. When Daniel was in a lion's den, he was able to shut the lion's mouth. When the 3 Hebrew children were put in a fiery furnace, He was able to deliver them. He was able to take 5 loaves and a couple of fish and feed thousands of people. You know why? Because God is able. He was able to make a priest silent and to make a donkey speak. He was able to make lame walk and dead to come to life. He was able to make a leper clean, and He was able to do all of those things. You know why? Because our God is able. Do you know He is able? Do you ever feel like I'm crying out for help and nobody is listening? And even if they were, could He change anything? I'm promising you this, that your God is able. If you feel desperate today, then there is great news that our God is able. Matter of fact, let me read this verse. It's just a part of a verse, and it's so stacked with important things. It says, God is able, in Ephesians 3, God is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine. That may not sound like more to you, but it is stacked, all of these little phrases together about God's ability. What is He able to do? Well, He's able to do what we ask. And that's a big start, because why ask if He's not able? But it's more than just what we ask. He said He's able to do all that we ask. But not just all that we ask, He's able to do more than all that we ask. And that's huge, but that's not all. He said He can do more than we ask or even imagine, but that's not all. He said He can do immeasurably more than you could even ask or imagine. How able is God? The answer is very able, exceedingly able, incredibly able. The God that He says you should cry out to, I just want you to know wherever you are today that He is able. Some of us, that may not ring real true today, but for somebody watching this right now, that is the word you need to hear. You want to believe so deeply in your heart that maybe there is a God, and maybe He is able, and maybe if I cried out, He would hear my groan, and He would say it's time to act. I promise you this, in your relationships, if we could start with the point that we have a God who is able, it would help us so much. But not just able, that's one arm. He is able. Moses lifted both arms, and the other arm is just as important. It is that he is willing. To know that God is able and not know that He is willing changes everything. Saying, hey, would you? Yes, I will. Can you? Oh, no, I can't is a completely different. He is willing as well, not just able. The Bible says that God knows the number of hairs on your head. He says He collects your tears in a bottle. He cares about you. He is willing to involve Himself with your life. The Bible tells us that He hears the groans and hurts of people, specifically people, and He responds to them. He is willing. It tells us that if you suffer, that God suffers with you. It gives us examples through Scripture of a dad whose son walks away and he suffers every day, and it compares God to him and waits for his prodigal son to come home. He became flesh. Jesus literally came to earth. We call it the doctrine of incarnation. It says literally that Jesus came to earth and made Himself needy, because He wanted us to understand how willing He is to participate with us. Can you imagine God Himself coming to earth and literally having to have a mom that He looked to every day and said, help? Would you? He had to have a mom who would tie the laces on His sandals. At the end of Jesus' life, when they began to crucify Him, He literally could not even carry His own cross. You know why? Because He put Himself in a position to show how willing He is, that He had to have help from someone else, a guy named Simon, just to carry His cross. He landed in a place where help was required, where his desire to have to depend was obvious. Even when He finishes and everything else, God in man's body ends up small and fragile and frail and needing help. And He did all of that just to illustrate to you and me that He is willing to work on our behalf. And it wasn't the end of His story, because God was able and God was willing. That wasn't the end of His story, and it's not the end of yours. So can I just ask you a couple questions when we kind of close things out? When it comes to your relationships, what do you think would happen? And I know this is just stupid, and I know some of you are just going to go, whatever, dude. I get it. I can accept that. Sometimes me too. But can you imagine what your life would be like? We said we all need help. We said God is able. We said God is willing. What would happen in your world, in every relationship, if you started where Moses started, going before God in desperation and saying, help? Let me give you, for instance, what would happen on Monday if when you drove into your workplace, if before you got out of your car, your truck, or off your bicycle or your roller skates or whatever you get there with, what if before you ever walked in or before you ever initiated or engaged anybody, if you just stopped and you went to God and you said, I need help. I can't do the relationships that I'm going to be thrown into today without your help. I'm starting, not finishing, with this strategy. I need help, because God is able and He is willing to help you there. How much would it change the outcomes of your day if you started by saying, my principal strategy is to turn to God in this and say, I need help? How much would it change before your feet hit the ground? For some of you that share life with a spouse, how much would it change before your feet hit the ground in the morning, before you had the first weird interaction, before your coffee even? If you could go to God and say, God, I need help. I know you're able and I know you're willing, and I can't face this day without you. I am turning to you. I am desperate for your help. How much would it change? Before you woke your children up in the morning, before you went in and started the chaos of the day, if you could just stop and say, I cannot be a dad, I cannot be a mom and succeed at this outside of God's help. God, I need you this day more than I need the book I read, more than the things I'm trying. My only hope, my desperate only hope, is to come to you, because I know you're able and I know you're willing. Will you guide my day? Will you guide my way? For those of you who are in dating relationships or looking for it, if you could start every day by being able to say, God, I can't do this on my own. What are the odds of me finding the person that I am suited for, who can bring joy into my life and not more hurt? What are the odds? But what are the odds if you started every day and went to God, face to face, you to Him, hands in the air, just to say, God, I know you're able and I know you're willing and I know you care? How much would that change things? wherever your most difficult relationship. Not to say, hey, at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, I'm going to God. But if you started every day and every relationship and every action and every reaction was based on those things. The problem is most of us don't believe that would be the fix. Because there's something inside of us that goes, there's got to be more to it than that. Well, I'll tell you this, that God doesn't help those who help themselves. He certainly doesn't want us to be passive. But I'll just tell you this, God helps people who are willing to admit that they need help. And if that is you, don't underestimate what the God of the universe can do when it comes to your relationships if you will submit yourself to Him, will humble yourself before Him. And I just wonder today if you could pick out that one relationship that's hurting the most, that one spot in your life that's the most upside down. And I wonder if in this moment, in this time, if you would go to God just like Moses as a first strategy of today and just say, God, I am desperately in need of your help because I know you're able and I know you're willing and I place all of my hope on you. Why don't we pray and do that now? So God, I don't know for anybody else where that is. I just know for me, on my best days, I'm not enough. On my best run in life, I can try to be a good dad, a good friend, a good pastor, a good husband, a good uncle, a good nephew, a good whatever role you've given me. But when it comes to people, that I am less than enough. And I know I am guilty of over and over thinking I can figure this out, I can work through it. And I know you want me to put effort in. But I know all of my efforts together still lead me to the same place, that I am desperate for your help. Would you give me the wisdom to start with that every day? That even as we finish this video today, that we wouldn't look around and hope for things to be better, but we would learn the habit of standing before you like Moses and saying, you are our first and main strategy. Outside of you, we are helpless. And as people come to you, would you let them be felt and understood? The fact that you are with them, would you make it where your presence is close and your hope is great? We thank you that you've offered us that ability. Would you hear the groans of your people and let this be the time that you choose to act? We ask it in your name.